Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. The Taliban have surrounded the city of GHAZNI in central Afghanistan. Officials say the fighters have taken over the civilians' homes to fight security forces. This is the latest assault on a provincial capital as the Taliban make a fresh push to gain territory. Meanwhile, the U.S. general leading the war, Austin Miller, has stepped down, transferring his authority to the U.S. Central Command Chief, General Frank McKenzie. In South Africa, at least 6 people have been killed and over 200 arrested in protests following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma. The army says it is deploying soldiers in the Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal provinces to assist law enforcement agencies. Nepal's Supreme Court has reinstated the country's parliament, which was dissolved by caretaker Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli in May. The court also ordered that Oli's rival Sher Bahadur Deuba be appointed as the Prime Minister. The move deals a major blow to Oli, who was unable to muster a majority in the House of Representatives. The World Health Organization says the Delta variant of coronavirus is ripping around the world at a scorching pace. WHO's Director General Tedros Adhanom says the variant first detected in India has now been found in 104 countries. In Pakistan, Prime Minister's aide on health, Faisal Sultan, says the army may be called in to implement the SOPs amid an increase in infections. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4 million lives and has infected over 186 million people. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The Taliban have surrounded the city of GHAZNI in central Afghanistan. Officials say the fighters have taken over the homes of civilians to fight security forces. Meanwhile, the U.S. general leading the war, Austin Miller, has stepped down, transferring his authority to U.S. Central Command Chief General Frank McKenzie. More in this report.
The Taliban are making a fresh push to surround cities and gain territory, emboldened by the departure of foreign forces. So far, they have not been able to hold provincial capitals, but they have put pressure on Afghan security forces to respond to offensives around the country. The fighters claim they have captured nearly 200 districts across Afghanistan. In a statement, spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid said thousands of Afghan troops have defected to the group. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Defense claims it has killed more than 270 fighters in the past 24 hours. It said operations were carried out in 15 provinces, including Nangarhar and Medan Vardak. Peace talks between the Taliban and the government are continuing in Doha, but officials say they are making little progress.
And for more on this, we are joined by Brigadier Retired Imran Malik, defense analyst from Lahore. Thank you for your time at Indus News. Now, firstly, today, both the Taliban and Kabul administration have reiterated their willingness for a peaceful political settlement. What are those sticking points which are preventing such an agreement from being reached?
Very much for having me on the program. I think there is just too big a gap in the positions of the Taliban and the National Unity Government for that gap to be bridged in such a short time. You see, when the Americans were, or the Allied forces were there in Afghanistan, at that time they could not achieve anything in the intra-Afghan dialogue. And I do not think that it is likely to succeed at this time, at this point in time. You must remember that there were 4 basic points that the United States had laid down as preconditions for its departure from Afghanistan. It was an intra-Afghan dialogue. It was an interim government, a ceasefire all around, and tackling the terrorist groups which are ensconced in Afghanistan's badlands. Not a single one of those points has been completed, or rather, most of them have not even been attempted. So it is most unlikely that any one of those points can be attempted at this point in time, because the Taliban are now ascendant, and their juggernaut, in a way, is moving and rolling all over Afghanistan. And I really do not see any reason for them to give up the most dominating position and then to compromise on what appears to be a potential victory for them.
So, Brigadier Malik, in their statement today, the Taliban mentioned peace talks with the government representatives in Iran and the interactions in Moscow as well, but they did not say a word about Doha talks. Does this mean that the Taliban are no longer viewing the intra-Afghan Doha talks as a prospect for the conflict resolution?
So you see, look at the people who represented the Afghan Taliban in Tehran and in Moscow. They are not the top-tier leadership of the Taliban. So these people who went there did not have the capacity to take decisions or to give any commitments. So I personally feel that the Taliban, who are ascendant now, as I've said already, they will not compromise their strong dominating position and come to a solution in which they have to compromise and agree with people they have been fighting for the last 20 years at least. That is the National Unity Government. What I feel is that the Afghan Taliban are most likely to make a run for Kabul and then serve a fait accompli to the world that here we are, now deal with us. And as a face-saving measure, it might include people from all other ethnicities and all other sectarian groups to give a whole of the Afghan nation image to the rest of the world and say that this is a coalition government that represents the whole of Afghanistan, and therefore now you must deal with that. And I think this is the most likely scenario to take place.
Now, the last but not the least, how close do you think is it to reality that the Taliban claim of controlling 85% of the Afghanistan's territory?
I don't think that with a pinch of salt at the moment, and but I'm quite sure that they have the majority of the country under their control. But a very specific pattern and a plan that seems to be emerging. You see, they've kept all major crossings into the neighboring countries, with Tajikistan, with Turkmenistan, and with Iran. And they are now moving into the central districts like GHAZNI, we talked about. And Kabul itself is under a great deal of pressure. So it is a full-fledged, I don't want to call it assault, but moves to get to get control over all of Afghanistan. And I think they are proceeding quite well on that. And if they are not having control over 85% territory at the moment, I feel that very soon, rather before the Americans leave Afghanistan for good, they might as well be controlling even more than 85%.
Brigadier Retired Imran Malik, thank you for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now, moving on, Pakistan and Tajikistan have agreed to further enhance bilateral relations. This comes as Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi called on his Tajik counterpart Sirajuddin Mohiruddin in Dushanbe. Both the leaders agreed to increase bilateral trade, promote regional connectivity, and strengthen people-to-people linkages. They also exchanged views on recent evolving situation in Afghanistan. Qureshi apprised Mohiruddin of Pakistan's role as a facilitator to achieve durable peace and stability in Afghanistan. The foreign minister is in Tajikistan on a 3-day visit to attend a key meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's Council of Foreign Ministers. He is also expected to hold meetings with his counterparts from Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Russia, and China. And for more on this, we have with us Mr. Einar Tenjin, political analyst from Beijing, China. Mr. Tenjin, thank you for your time at Indus News. So this meeting of the SCO comes with Afghanistan once again at a crossroads. We are hearing that there will be a joint statement, especially regarding Afghanistan. So what is being expected from this SCO huddle over the rapidly evolving situation in Afghanistan?
Well, there's supposed to be a joint statement. That's per the word of Wang Yi, the foreign secretary of China. It's a very difficult situation because of the situation in Afghanistan. There will be a meeting with the there's a special group with the within the SCO that deals with Afghanistan issues, and that will be consulted. There will be a general meeting. There will be a number of sideline meetings. But the main goal here is to somehow make sure that the situation in Afghanistan does not spin further out of control than it already has.
Mr. Tenjin, Pakistan has come forward as a key proponent and facilitator for a peaceful political settlement in Afghanistan. Going forward, how crucial is Pakistan's role in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization vis-a-vis Afghanistan?
Well, it's absolutely crucial. I mean, both sides, the Taliban and the current government, come from the Pashtun tribal area. In addition to that, there are large Pashtun populations within Pakistan. It's going to be necessary to have some sort of resolution there. Otherwise, there's going to be a tremendous amount of bloodletting. The situation is not optimal. The very, very hasty withdrawal of the U.S. troops has created a more or less crisis situation for the existing Afghanistan government. Large, as everyone can see by the news, large swaths of land are being reclaimed or taken over by the Taliban. And it seems to be getting worse. This is an interesting meeting in the sense that since the U.S. has pulled out, this takes away all elements of outside forces. And I mean that only from the perspective of outside the region. Right now, you have the representatives who are in that region who are going to attempt to try to solve a situation that has not been solved by two invasions, one by Russia and then one by the United States. So it'll be interesting to see, well, not interesting, let's be hopeful that there can be some sort of consensus on how this can be resolved.
So, Mr. Tenjin, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization marks its 20th anniversary this year and has come a long way. With the G7 meeting's anti-China focus and the rifts between the Western allies and China, Russia widening, do you see the role of the SCO expanding in the near future?
The SCO could expand slightly in the future, but right now it's less about expansion than working within the existing countries. Obviously, India has a lot of animus towards both China and also Pakistan. There are also other neighbor disputes with neighbors. It's very important from a regional perspective to try to bring them on board and achieve some sort of détente. Hopefully, the situation with COVID-19 will bring sense to people and understand that there are big regional issues, not only Afghanistan, not only terrorism, but also COVID-19 and economics that have to be tackled on a regional basis. They cannot do this. It's going to be bad for all affected if there's some sort of proxy war or simmering, some sort of actions or indirect actions taken or supported by different countries. This will only lead to more bloodshed and misery.
Mr. Einar Tenjin, a political analyst, joining us from Beijing, China. Thank you for your time at Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now moving on, Kashmiris all around the world are set to observe the 90th anniversary of the Martyrs' Day on Tuesday. The All Parties Hurriyat Conference has called for a complete strike across the valley. More in this report.
Voices of the 22 Kashmiris martyred in front of the Srinagar Central Jail 90 years ago still echo through the occupied valley. Their chants for freedom have lived as their legacy, which resonates in the hearts of Kashmiris to this day. The martyrs of 1931 stood up to the Dogra rule to protest against the imprisonment of Abdul Qadir, a former British Army officer who decided to stand up for freedom against oppression. The troops killed each person who stood up to make the call for Friday prayer. The day commemorates those martyrs who had been declared a national day soon after the birth of India and Pakistan in 1947, but the Indian government dropped it from its list of public holidays after stripping the region of its autonomy in 2019. Since then, hundreds of Kashmiris were martyred by Indian troops while thousands others thrown into jail to silent dissent.
Moving on to Nepal, where the Supreme Court has reinstated the country's parliament, which was dissolved by the caretaker Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli in May. The court also ordered that Oli's rival Sher Bahadur Deuba be appointed as the Prime Minister. It said that the parliament must be reconvened within 7 days. The move deals a major blow to Oli, who was unable to muster a majority in the House of Representatives. Oli's aide, Rajan Bhattarai, called the court's move a wrong political decision, which will have long-term implications on democracy. In South Africa, at least 6 people have been killed and over 200 arrested in protests following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma. The army says it is deploying soldiers in the Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal provinces to assist law enforcement agencies. Police say the rioters have disrupted the traffic by barricading major roads with burning tires and trucks. Authorities have warned that anyone using social media to encourage the rioting will be arrested and prosecuted. The violence was triggered last week when President Zuma began serving a 15-month sentence for contempt of court. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Beijing says it has driven away a U.S. warship that illegally entered Chinese waters near the Paracel Islands. In a statement, the country's armed forces urged Washington to immediately stop such provocative actions. The PLA said the USS Benfold entered the waters without the approval of the Chinese government. The army termed the move a serious violation of Beijing's sovereignty. It accused the U.S. of undermining the stability of the South China Sea. Meanwhile, in a statement, the U.S. Navy said the vessel entered the waters under international law. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said freedom of the seas is an enduring interest of all nations. The EU has extended economic sanctions against Russia for 6 more months, accusing it of destabilizing the situation in the Ukraine. In a statement, the European Council also called on Moscow to ensure the implementation of the Minsk agreements. The sanctions limit Russian access to EU's primary and secondary capital markets. The measures also prohibit the import, export, or transfer of all defense-related materials. The EU has been applying different sanctions since 2014 on Russia, accusing it of violating the Ukraine's sovereignty. It has also imposed sanctions on 4 Russian high-ranking officials over the arrest and the prosecution of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Russia says its fighter jets have intercepted 2 U.S. reconnaissance planes over the Black Sea. The Defense Management Center said EP-3E Ares and CL-600 Challenger planes approached the border. It said airspace control systems of the Southern Military District detected the aircraft. Officials say the Sukhoi Su-30 and Su-27 warplanes were scrambled to turn away the spy planes. The center said there was no violation of the state border. 68 people have died in different lightning incidents over the past 24 hours in India. Local media reported 41 deaths in Uttar Pradesh, 7 in Madhya Pradesh, and 20 in Rajasthan. In Rajasthan's capital city of Jaipur, 11 people died and many were injured as lightning struck the watchtower at Amar Fort. Police said most of them were young who died while taking selfies in the rain. At least 17 others were reported injured across the state. And in separate incident, 3 people have been killed after their house collapsed in a landslide triggered by heavy rainfall in Uttarakhand. Israeli forces have wounded 6 Palestinians with live ammunition in Jenin city of the West Bank. 5 other civilians were arrested by undercover troops from 2 neighborhoods of the city. Occupying forces raided the neighborhoods, barged into homes and fired indiscriminately. A young girl was among those wounded. Earlier, illegal Israeli settlers cut the main power line in Jalud village of Nablus city of the West Bank. Meanwhile, the forces have also seized a healthcare clinic in the West Bank and assaulted those who resisted. Israel's security cabinet has decided to cut millions of dollars from tax revenues it collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. The Prime Minister's office said $183 million, or about 7% of the Palestinian Authority's total tax revenue. Meanwhile, Palestinian media says PA gives the withheld funds to the families of the Palestinians jailed in Israel or killed by Israeli forces. It said the non-payment of tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority is a recurring issue. A 2019 report by the UN said the Israeli act cripples the PA's ability to meet its financial obligations. In Jordan, a court has found a former royal official and a relative of King Abdullah guilty of sedition and incitement against the monarchy. Basim Abdullah and Sharif Hassan bin Zaid, who denied the charges, were both sentenced to 15 years in prison. The 2 men were among 18 people detained in April when former Crown Prince Hamza was placed under house arrest over the alleged coup plot. The prince, who is the king's half-brother, did not face any charges. He diffused the crisis in April after pledging allegiance to the king. The World Health Organization says the Delta variant of coronavirus is ripping around the world at a scorching pace. WHO's Director General Tedros Adhanom says the variant, first detected in India, has now been found in 104 countries. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4 million lives and infected over 186 million others.
Despite some gains, many countries are taken aback by the highly contagious Indian Delta variant that has dimmed all hopes of normalcy for the foreseeable future. India's northeastern Manipur state started door-to-door random testing and mass vaccinations as the positivity rate surges across the state. Because of the Delta strain, Bangladesh too has registered the highest number of COVID-19 fatalities and cases in a single day. Japan's capital, Tokyo, is entering its 4th state of emergency today, set to last through August 22nd, covering the duration of the Tokyo Olympics. In Russia, people have waited in long queues for hours to get vaccinated amid record cases and deaths in the country.
I have been standing here for 7 hours to receive the Covivac vaccine. I really want this vaccine because I trust the developers of this vaccine, and for various other reasons as well. But there is a huge queue here.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says England is tantalizingly close to lifting final curbs. The situation is worsening in Australia despite the country's biggest city entering its 3rd week of lockdown.
I want to stress again, we are at an absolutely critical phase of this disease. All of us want to get out of this lockdown as soon as we can. All of us want to reduce the stress we're all feeling. And the future is in our hands. It's up to us to make sure we get the word out.
Authorities have introduced new restrictions in Libya after cases hit a record high. South Africa has extended tight COVID-19 rules for another 14 days amid the tight grip of a 3rd wave.
In Pakistan, coronavirus has claimed 15 lives and infected over 1,800 people overnight. The health ministry says the death tally is approaching 22,600. The NCOC said Pakistan's positivity rate has declined to 3.84%. The ministry says the country's caseload has exceeded 975,000, while about 914,000 people have recovered. There are around 38,000 active cases across Pakistan and more than 2,100 are critical. In Pakistan, the Senate has passed a new bill that criminalizes torture and custodial death. The bill states that any public servant found to be involved in torture may face up to 10-year imprisonment and fine up to 2 million rupees. It further states that anyone involved in custodial death may be punished with imprisonment for life. Every offense punishable under this act will be non-bailable. It also lays out the procedure for filing a complaint in case of custodial torture. The UN Human Rights Council has adopted a draft resolution on the rights of Rohingya and other minorities in Myanmar. The resolution was presented by Pakistan's permanent mission to the UN on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in the Council's 47th session. The resolution expressed concerns over the restrictions on humanitarian access in the country. It also called upon Myanmar to ensure the implementation of the international humanitarian law. The resolution urged the international community to effectively address the irregular maritime movements of Rohingya Muslims. It requested the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to monitor the progress of the rights situation in Myanmar. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel has accused the United States of provoking unrest in his country. In a televised address, he said U.S. sanctions are responsible for the country's worsening economic crisis. This comes as thousands of people took to the streets to protest food shortages and restrictions on civil liberties. More in this report.
Cuba has been plunged into turmoil by the largest protests against its communist government in decades. Thousands took to the streets in towns and cities across the island shouting freedom and down with the dictatorship. The protesters say the COVID-19 pandemic and economic measures taken by the government have made their life increasingly difficult. Last year, Cuba's largely state-controlled economy shrank by 11%, its worst decline in almost 3 decades. They are calling for President Miguel Diaz-Canel to step down, blaming him for their sufferings. But the Cuban president says the protests are a provocation by mercenaries hired by the US to destabilize the country. President Joe Biden, on the other hand, has extended support for the protesters, saying Washington stands with their call for freedom.
North Korea has dismissed U.S. humanitarian aid as a sinister political scheme to put pressure on other countries. The foreign ministry published a criticism of Washington in an article on an official website. A researcher said the U.S. links aid to its foreign policy goals or pressure on human rights issues. He said countries that relied upon Washington's assistance went through awfully bitter experiences. The article alleges that Washington continues to manipulate aid while the world battles the COVID-19 pandemic. American officials have said they are supportive of the humanitarian aid to North Korea, but no efforts are underway to provide direct assistance. In China's capital, Beijing, hundreds of flights have been cancelled while schools and tourist spots are shut due to torrential downpours. Authorities ask the residents to stay home as the capital is poised to experience the heaviest rainfall of this year. They warned of extreme rainstorms along with thunder and lightning in Beijing and neighboring areas. Popular attractions, including a part of the Great Wall, were also shut as around 100 millimeters of rain is predicted. State media said some of Beijing's automatic trains will be operated manually instead. Meanwhile, weather authorities have warned of floods in 14 rivers, including tributaries in Sichuan and Shaanxi. In the U.S. state of California, the Beckworth complex fire has grown to over 61,000 acres with only 9% containment. A brutal heat wave is punishing the western parts of the country, with temperatures soaring to record high.
The blaze, which broke out on the 3rd of July, forced evacuations from many small towns in California's 3 counties. Officials say more than 1,700 firefighters are battling with the aggressive fire. Meanwhile, the boot-like fire in Oregon has blackened 144,000 acres with no containment so far. The National Weather Service issued excessive heat warnings across much of the region. Temperatures in Death Valley spiked to 54 degrees Celsius, making it one of the hottest spots on the planet. Last year, wildfires scorched more than 17,000 square kilometers of land and destroyed hundreds of Californian homes.
Now, divers in Dubai can explore an underwater sunken city in the world's deepest pool. It reaches depth of 60 meters at a facility called Deep Dive Dubai. Handout footage shows divers swimming around an underwater arcade, library and an apartment. The facility says it was confirmed as the world's deepest pool by Guinness World Records. It can hold the equivalent of 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The pool is currently operating on an invitation-only basis, with public bookings set to begin at the end of July. In Italy, the mayor of Florence, Dario Nardella, has been moonlighting as a guide to boost tourism recovery. This comes after the historic city saw a sharp drop in visitors amid the COVID-19 outbreak. More in this report.
Florence is the birthplace of the Renaissance movement in Europe and has been the pinnacle of cultural tourism in Europe. However, according to a report by the Tourism Research Center of Florence, the number of its visitors in 2020 decreased by about 3.18 million. The number of hotel bookings also plunged by 80.4% from the previous year because of the pandemic. Due to a busy schedule, the scope of Dario Nardella's tour guide service is generally limited to the Old Palace. He highlighted that he was looking forward to the arrival of overseas tourists, including Chinese tourists, for a complete recovery.
And now the business updates. The U.S. stocks have risen as investors waited for the second quarter earnings season to kick off this week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose close to 0.25% at opening. The S&P 500 also landed in the positive category, opening close to 0.25% higher. The tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite grew nearly 0.1% higher. Meanwhile, oil prices dropped as concerns over slowing global growth outweighed the prospect of tightening supply. And now for weather updates, we have Naila with us.
Thank you. Let's begin with Abu Dhabi, where it is an intense 41 degrees Celsius and the weather is going to be hot and humid. So stay hydrated and stay calm because this temperature will fluctuate and possibly go higher. If you are in Amsterdam, the temperature is around 23 degrees Celsius with some cloudy weather. It sounds really nice and cozy. Although if you are in Ankara, you will experience some sun with temperatures rising to 33 degrees Celsius. Heading down under to Auckland, the winter weather is chilly at 11 degrees Celsius with some rain. While in Bangkok, make sure you have your umbrella on hand because there will be thunderstorms. In Beijing, there will be rain with temperatures heading up to 27 degrees Celsius. If you are sick and tired of the rain, head to Beirut, where there is some sunshine with temperatures at around 30 degrees Celsius, but it will be hot, so fair warning. Going up to Berlin, the weather seems to be chilly and a bit cloudy with temperatures rising to 25 degrees Celsius. While the residents of Cairo will have to deal with some extremely bright and extremely sunny high temperatures of up to 37 degrees Celsius. However, heading down under to Canberra, the winter weather is around 14 degrees Celsius with some clouds. Although there will also be some cloudy weather in Islamabad and Jakarta, but temperatures will be around 29 degrees Celsius and 33 degrees Celsius respectively. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Naila, for the weather updates. And that brings us to the end of the news bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.